Chapter 493, Delusion 1. Eugene's vision was pitch black, but he could still tell that Noir Giabella was different from how she usually was. He didn't want to even think about the fact that he knew her well enough to say how she usually was, but it was so blatantly obvious that there was something different about the current Noir that Eugene couldn't help but have such a feeling. But he couldn't see her expression clearly. It wasn't like their surroundings were particularly dark. Even if they were in pitch darkness without even a single source of light, Eugene's eyes would have still been able to clearly see the other person. But even so, for some reason he couldn't get a clear look at Noir's face. He couldn't see her expression or what kind of emotions might be prompting such an expression. However, what Eugene could clearly see were her eyes. It felt like her eyes had been drained of color. Those purple eyes, which used to shine so brightly, now felt hollow and dark, as if he was looking into the depths of an abyss. They were so empty that Eugene was left guessing what might exist at the very bottom of those depths. What is it? Eugene frowned. He couldn't immediately comprehend just what he was feeling from her. Was it because he didn't have the spare mental capacity for it? It was true that Eugene wasn't in a great condition at the moment. His battle against the specter had only just ended. The recoil from ignition was making his whole body ache, and even his head was a bit dizzy. Then, before he could even get a few moments to recover, he had been attacked. This whole situation was difficult to process. A scream suddenly tore through the air. Hi-yi. There were far too many things going on in one place. To start off, Eugene had just wanted to make a public statement, but even that hadn't been so easy to manage. Before he could even celebrate his victory and bask in the afterglow, Eugene had been attacked. Moreover, that attack had been extremely dangerous. If that beast of disaster hadn't held back his sword on his own accord, then that blade would have. You son of a bitch. Sienna cursed as she abruptly arrived above the scene. She would never have imagined that this bastard would actually do something like this. The blade of incarceration, Gavid Lindman. Even back then, 300 years ago, he had been a pain in the ass. Yet even so, she had always thought he had a knight-like sense of honor. Who could have thought that he would actually wait for them to let their guards down, aim for a situation in which his target was unable to resist, and then attack them? This turn of events made Sienna feel such rage that all of her hair was standing on end. Where? Sienna swooped down, trailing her galaxy behind her. Frost, which was held in front of her, engulfed Gavid in an icy wind. Dozens of lights flashed forth from the galaxy behind Sienna. In mere moments, Sienna cast a spell that attempted to capture Gavid. At this distance, Sienna's will was enforced on Gavid by her absolute decree through a simple gust of wind. Startled by all that was happening, Gavid leaped backward. But despite his instantaneous reaction, he wasn't able to escape being engulfed by those dozens of lights. Ho! Gavid huffed in surprise. To be honest, Gavid was amazed. Just earlier, his sword, Glory, had been able to slice through Sienna's magic with the help of his demon eye of divine glory. However, now it appeared that slicing through her spells wouldn't be so easy. Is this really magic? Gavid thought doubtfully. Opening his demon eye of divine glory fully, Gavid saw that Sienna's spell contained a completely different power than any magic he had ever seen before. He wouldn't be able to slice through it. No, by rights he should have been able to slice through it, but for some reason he just couldn't. The power contained within Sienna's spell was almost barbaric in its simplicity and strength. As such, Gavid decided to respond in the same fashion. He struck back with simple and barbaric force. His demon eye of divine glory glowed with a red light as a different force enveloped Glory's blade. Clink, clink, clink. The chains of incarceration were now wrapped around the blade of Gavid's sword. When he swung his sword at the spell encircling him, the chains flew out and wrapped around the spell. That should put an end to that. These chains were part of incarceration's special ability, and the demon eye of divine glory was able to perfectly reproduce the power of the Demon King's special ability. No mere magic could hope to escape those chains. The end. Sienna sneered. Gavid wasn't the one to decide that. Since Sienna was the one who cast the spell, she was also the only one who could decide when it ended. 300 years ago, Sienna's magic hadn't been able to escape those chains. As such, there had been nothing she could do but be left helpless in front of the Demon King. But now things were different. Even if the Demon King of incarceration himself were here, he wouldn't be able to easily put a stop to Sienna's magic whenever he wished. Clink, clink. The chains binding Sienna's spell were being pulled taut. Gavid, who had thought it was already over, widened his eyes in disbelief. The chains completely shattered. The spell that had broken free from its bonds like a wild horse leaped forward and attacked Gavid. Boom! Gavid twisted as he was caught in the spell's explosion, and soon he fell to the ground, looking like a tattered rag. Even as Gavid was coughing up blood, he laughed in amazement. The chains of incarceration had actually broken. Sienna's spell hadn't been cancelled when those chains bound it. How else was Gavid meant to react to this fact? After all, this meant that Sienna's magic had actually managed to transcend the realm of mere magic. How amazing, Gavid marveled. Boom 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 boom. The chain of spells didn't end even after Gavid fell to the ground. The ground split open around him as he was hammered ever deeper into the soil. Then brilliant light also fell down on Gavid from above. Christina had leaped off of Rhaimyra's back and was descending to the ground with her wings of light spread wide open. Her eyes were widened in an angry glare as her hands were stretched out towards Gavid. Anis's enraged curses also helped to bolster Christina's determination as she mustered up all of her will. Light poured down from Christina onto the earth around Gavid. This radiant light was suppressing Gavid's regeneration. Gavid squinted his eyes in pain even as he was buried ever deeper into the ground. So it wasn't just Hamel, Gavid realized. Sienna of Calamity was also here. Her magic had certainly been impressive even 300 years ago, but now she had even managed to transcend the realm of ordinary magic. Gavid hadn't actually fought against her spells with his full strength. However, the same would also apply to Sienna, as she hadn't given it her all either. Then there was Christina Rodriguez. As the saint of the present era, her divine power unmistakably surpassed the heights reached by that of Anis of Hell. Her light was able to cut off the flow of dark power within him and even suppressed his source of immortality. Also, just look at those radiantly shining wings of hers. Gavid narrowed his eyes. All of them could pose a threat to the Demon King. They were true enemies of Helmuth and of Pandemonium. Gavid chewed his bottom lip as he pondered this fact. It wasn't just Sienna and Christina either. Having regained control of their bodies, the other main forces of the Liberation Army were also springing back into action. While surrounding Gavid, who had been buried in a deep pit within the earth and was covered in a layer of light, they were all bearing their hostility towards the Duke. Even as she continued to concentrate on sealing away Gavid, Christina ran over to Eugene's side with a cry, "Sir Eugene!" But before she could get close, Eugene quickly raised his hand to stop Christina from approaching him. "I'm fine," Eugene insisted. Christina tried to protest, "But you should already know by now that holy magic or first aid won't have any effect on my current condition," Eugene reminded her. The aftermath of overloading one's core was different from receiving wounds to the body or the internal organs. This was because the core wasn't actually a physical object in the first place. No matter how much of an expert Christina and Anis were when it came to healing magic, they wouldn't be able to heal the recoil from ignition. The only way to treat it was just a few straight days of rest. Christina was left unable to say anything, her shoulders shaking in concern. She wasn't getting close to Eugene just because she wanted to try and heal him or to be there to support him. It was purely because Christina was concerned. Right now, the Queen of the Night Demons was standing next to Eugene. Noir Giabella was right by his side. Christina knew that Noir had always displayed an excessive affection and obsession when it came to Eugene, but something about her today was strange. She was different from how she usually was. The strange atmosphere around her was so blatant that even Christina could sense it. If it were before today, Christina wouldn't have had the faintest suspicion that Noir Giabella might suddenly try to kill Eugene with no warning. Noir herself definitely didn't want that kind of ending to their story. That crazy night demon wanted to impart a greater meaning and emotion to her and Eugene's act of trying to kill each other. As such, the end of their road together could only be reached after extensive interactions and preparations on her part. However, Christina felt like that could possibly no longer be the case. It seemed like Noir might suddenly, without any warning, try to kill Eugene. Christina could almost see Noir reaching out to grab Eugene's throat with both hands, wringing with all of her strength until his neck snapped. If Noir were to take such actions, Eugene, in his current weakened state, would be unable to put up any resistance. "I'm fine," Eugene repeated his assurance. This time his words weren't just meant for Christina. They were also aimed at Sienna. Sienna had also tried to reach Eugene's side but was left with a confused expression. Eugene was also fully aware of their specific worries. However, he still shook his head firmly as he told them he'd be fine. Was this because he trusted Noor wouldn't do something crazy and unexpected? It was impossible to say that he didn't have any such trust. Although Eugene didn't want to admit it, he was aware of the strange and twisted sense of trust that had grown between him and Noor. However, even setting that aside, he still felt that there was a need for him to have a long talk with the current Noor. Since his attitude was so firm, Sienna and the Saints no longer tried to get closer to Eugene. Instead, they focused their attention on Gavid, whom they had buried deep within the ground. TH most up-to-date NOVLS are published on Rewabove.com. If at all possible, right here and now. They felt the temptation to either kill Gavid or seal him away forever. Though that's probably impossible, Sienna silently admitted to herself. Whether it was killing Gavid or sealing him away, neither was truly feasible. It wasn't just a matter of difficulty, it was simply unattainable. The title of Blade of Incarceration wasn't just for show. The reason they could capture him like this was... He's just checking us out, Sienna thought with a frown. What was the full extent of Sienna's magic? Just how much sacred power did the saint possess? What were the levels of the other foes currently surrounding him? Sienna clicked her tongue in disgust. She had no desire to expose her full power at such an early point, so she had made sure to moderate the power of her spells. Eugene slowly turned his gaze away from Sienna and the others. Noor was staring at Eugene with an unchanging expression on her face. That point alone was enough for Eugene to start feeling concerned. Even under these circumstances, Noor seemed to have barely anything to say. If this were any other time, she would have already said something by now. Congratulations. Eugene recalled what had happened in Shimuan. At that time, Noor had burst into the banquet hall wearing a racy swimsuit, then sang a song for Eugene as she handed him a cake. Congratulations on your victory, Eugene Lionheart. When Noor said these words, her voice had been all chopped up. Even then, Eugene hadn't been able to see her expression clearly. Her lips seemed to have been twisted in a grin. But had that really been a smile? If it was, it didn't seem to match the emotions that she had been showing. Eugene looked at Noir's hands. There he saw that her left hand, which still had that damned ring on it, was clutching the other ring that Noir had hung on a necklace around her neck. Eugene tried to suppress the surge of feelings rising up within him. Eugene trailed off, swallowing a sigh that had almost unconsciously left his lips. What's with that expression? Noir asked, tilting her head slightly to the side. She forced herself to release her tight grip on her necklace. He wanted to destroy them. Whether it was the ring she was wearing on her finger or the ring hanging around her neck, she wanted to destroy them both. However, she simply couldn't break them. With just the slightest bit of force, she should have been able to turn them into powder. However, she just couldn't find the strength to do so. Noor cleared her throat. I have to congratulate you, my lord, too. Noor swallowed the words she had almost unconsciously said out loud. Once again, Noor was forced to readjust her expression. Eugene, Noor finally managed to finish once she had regained control of her expression along with her emotions. Noir's head was currently dizzy with emotions and memories that had been buried deep within her, ones that didn't belong to her. Noir hated this. All of the memories and emotions going through her mind should be the ones that belonged solely to herself. The reason she loved Hamel/Eugene should also be something that was completely unique and new to Noir. However, the memories that had suddenly resurfaced in her head, those memories that weren't from her current life, those memories that she had never chosen to make, and the emotions that accompanied them. Isn't it hard? Noir asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Her emotions kept fluctuating of their own accord. These memories were making her see a completely different side of her dear Hamel, the man whom she loved. Especially that one memory that especially left Noir with a feeling of disgust. Because the memory of that final moment made light of something that Noir had been hoping for all of her life. She had always wanted to be held in the arms of her lover during her final moments, uttering her last words to him before she died. Yet Noir had never once been able to picture the scene of her own death. That was why she had fallen for Hamel's intense killing intent. She had wanted to play out her final moments underneath that man's pure and unwavering murderous intent. She had wanted that moment to be special for both of them. However, it turned out that the two of them had already shared such a special moment together. She had already experienced her own longed-for death a long time ago. She had experienced being loved, being held in his arms, being kissed and then dying at his hands. Just look at the state you're in. I can see that you are struggling with a lot of things, Noor said as she slowly approached Eugene. She had a smile on her face, but it was only skin deep. Eugene couldn't sense the slightest trace of any emotion that matched her expression. It's fine if you sit down, Noor persuaded. Eugene didn't respond. Just like she said, it was difficult for him even to stay standing, but Eugene continued to stand up straight where he was as he glared back into Noir's eyes. Why are you staring at me like that, dear Eugene? Could it be that you are embarrassed to show any weakness in front of me? Noir asked with a smile. She leaned forward slightly, drawing closer to Eugene as she continued. However, I really like seeing you when you're at your weakest. After all, you always insist on showing your strong side, don't you? In that case, since it's rare to see you like this, it makes me want to keep looking even more. Eugene stayed silent. If you want, I can lend you my shoulder. If that isn't enough to satisfy you, I can even offer up my lap. Or perhaps you would prefer to rest with your head on my chest. Noir asked seductively, mischief blended in with her smile. Her outstretched hand moved closer to Eugene. Noir giggled. Foo-foo, if I had my way, I would also like to whisper into your ear what we might do next, but it seems I'll have to restrain myself. Because no matter how much I may desire it, those kinds of activities would be difficult for you in your current state. Or perhaps not. It might be difficult for you to move your body currently, but if it's in a dream. Noir Giabella. Eugene finally broke his silence. Noir blinked in surprise at having her name suddenly called out like this. After staring at Eugene for a few moments, she burst into laughter. What's with that all of a sudden? Noir asked once she had calmed down. Calling out my name all of a sudden, Noir. Giabella. That's right, that is who I am. Have you? Eugene paused, finally letting out the sigh that he'd been holding back. You've remembered the past as well, haven't you? This time it was Noir's turn to fall silent. In that case, what do you want me to call you? Eugene asked, tilting his head forward. Thanks to that, the distance between him and Noir had shrunk even narrower. A beautiful face, a mischievous smile, and eyes that were lacking any sort of light. A somber feeling lurked within those dark abysses. Saint, Eugene offered. She had been called the saintess of the god of war. Which? Eugene tried again. Before she became the saint, she was called the Twilight Witch. Eugene hesitated before uttering one final name, Arya? As soon as he said this name, Eugene was sent falling backward. He wasn't able to resist. Just as he was about to land flat on his back, a gentle hand cradled his body and arrested his fall. It was Noir. Even though she was the one who had pushed Eugene down, she carefully supported him as they both slowly fell to the ground. Noir's necklace slipped free with a jingle. The ring swayed in front of Eugene's eyes. His ears were filled with the sound of heavy breathing as her sweetly scented breath came closer. A new light was flickering within Noir's dull, hollow eyes. Noir silently stared down at Eugene with eyes that looked like they were about to burst into tears at any moment. Chapter 494. Delusion 2. She didn't have a name. She couldn't even remember the name that her parents might have given her when she was younger. There were a fair amount of such orphans in any era. Children who had lost their parents before their egos had even fully formed, or children who had been swaddled in a cloth or placed in a basket and abandoned as soon as they were born. She didn't even know how she had come to be an orphan. All she knew was that starting at some point she had been living in her alley. She was part of a gang of children with similar circumstances. Of course, older and larger individuals, people who stood on the border between childhood and adulthood, were in charge of the gang. Each day was spent living hand to mouth. It was a life in which it wouldn't have been strange if she had caught a disease, was beaten up, or even died at any time. Most of the other children lived their lives while accepting this situation as if it was only natural. They were satisfied with just having enough to eat each day and a safe place to rest. They didn't even have any thoughts about what might happen tomorrow, the day after, 3 days later, 5 days later, a week later, a month later, a year later, or at any point in the future. But she was different. She wasn't satisfied with this dirty little back alley. As long as she got just a little bit older, when this body of hers managed to sprout a little, she would definitely do something other than continue to beg. But that said, would that make it any easier for her to earn money? That wouldn't really be the case. The next part of her life would be spent peddling wildflowers in the back alleys. 1. The price of wildflowers would only be a pittance, and the little money that was earned from this job would just end up getting pocketed by the older teens. It would also increase the probability of her catching some kind of disease. There was no way any of the men who would come crawling into the back alleys to buy wildflowers were the clean type, and the girl was observant enough to tell that the most excited ones among them were usually also violent. There were only a few years left until that would be her fate. Would she be able to survive if she left the back alleys? She decided that she would survive no matter what she had to do. Even though it might be dangerous and she might even end up with an even more difficult life. What's your name? No matter how many plans she might have come up with and contemplated, in the end, she was still just a child, so her actions were also extremely childlike. When she was begging on the street, she always made sure to speak politely to an old woman who wouldn't just pass by like the others but would always give her a few pennies whenever they met. This happened frequently, as consistently as she could manage, so that the girl could get a better understanding of the other person, but all of her efforts must have seemed obvious to the old woman. I don't have one. She was telling the truth when she said that she didn't have a name. The names that they used to address each other in the back alley were all merely nicknames that couldn't really be considered actual names. In that case, allow me to give you a name. The old woman was a witch, but she didn't end up cooking the girl for her dinner. Instead, the girl became her servant. She assisted the witch in a variety of different ways. The young girl did many things that only a girl like her could do. She lured in other children and tricked them into the old woman's cauldron, committed petty theft for the witch, picked herbs and mushrooms in the mountains, and also wrote down what the old woman dictated. The girl also learned a lot during this time. It turned out she had a talent for it. Your name will be. The girl killed the witch. She didn't have any particularly impressive reason for doing so. In the first place, she didn't have any desire for revenge on the witch. Instead, she actually felt grateful towards the old woman. Thanks to the old woman, she was able to leave her alley. She learned how to write and how to use magic. She also learned the various tricks that she would need in order to survive in this world on her own. If the old woman had good intentions for the girl wouldn't have killed her. However, the witch only had malicious intent toward the girl. The witch had started becoming envious of her young and beautiful disciple. No, since when had she even taken the girl as a disciple? She had obviously only taken this girl to use her as a servant for a short period of time. But at some point the girl had become her disciple and leached away all of her talent. Or at least that was what the witch thought. So the old woman decided to kill the girl with her own 2 hands, stew her up and eat her. That was why the girl had to kill her. Arya, Nor muttered quietly. Her name at that time hadn't been Arya. The old woman had given her a different name, but it was one that wasn't worth remembering. Even now she couldn't recall what it might have been. Left on her own after killing the old woman, the girl had abandoned that name. She then gave herself a new name. Upon hearing that a certain country was hiring wizards to work in the royal palace, she headed there. The deadline for applying to the position had been fast approaching, but that didn't pose any problems for the girl. This was because plenty of wizards from her country had applied immediately after hearing the news and were traveling to the royal palace for the interview while filled with excitement. The girl carefully took her pick and killed one of those wizards. She then stole that wizard's face and identity, which was all she needed to do to get the position. After entering the royal palace, she spent the next several decades there. All because she wasn't satisfied with living just for today. Chasing the future, she had left her alley and had transformed into the royal court witch. The Twilight Witch. At some point she began to be addressed more often by her nickname than her official name. This was something that she had planned. Being known by such a title rather than an actual name enabled her to mystically draw out more power from the worship of her followers. That was how things had been in that era. In that era, through the worship provided by other humans, people were able to become something more than human. It was at that time that she entered the evil path and made plans for her ascension. During the chaos sparked by the Demon King of Incarceration's invasion, the royal court witch took the chance to turn the king and his ministers into her puppets, placing the entire kingdom beneath her feet. In a certain sense, her actions were even more terrible than those of the demon folk and the demon kings, as after she managed to wrest control of the country, she thoroughly tamed the populace by using both an enticing carrot and terrifying stick. Her fearsome notoriety was such that even the monarchs of the surrounding nations were forced to turn their eyes away from her deeds. This was the woman known as the Twilight Witch. Please. But then she was defeated. The grand and imposing castle that the witch had built up around herself was left in ruins by the god of war. Was it because she didn't want to die? Did she hope that her life wouldn't just end like this? Did she have any regrets remaining? Or perhaps... Visit fruobnovel.com for the Est Envel reading experience. What's your name? Was it because she was captivated by the sight of the man standing with his back against the setting sun, his sword slung over his shoulder? Please grant me the honor of a new name. She had never attached any special meaning to any of the names that she had held thus far. Naturally, this meant that she had never cherished or valued any of the names she had been given. But the Twilight Witch sensed something instinctively. She would be spending a very long time together with this man. So just as he had taken everything from her, one day she would also take everything from him. For the sake of that goal, she would need to become someone who this man saw as special. She would also need to consider him as someone special to herself. So she asked him for a name. Because she didn't want to give him any one of those trifling names that she had never cherished, valued, or placed any special meaning in. She had made such a request to become someone special to him and for the sake of claiming him as someone special to herself. Arya, Norgiabella muttered faintly, gasping for breath as she stared at Eugene. Arya, that name. The memories that had been vaguely lingering in the back of her head came back into piercing clarity the moment Noor heard the name Arya. As such, she couldn't hold it back any longer. Noor took a deep breath as she tried to silence her panting. She really didn't want to think of that name as something special to her. Noor struggled to speak. Her eyes were full of turmoil and agitation. Eugene had never imagined that he would ever see such an expression on Norgiabella, who had always exuded an air of composure and amusement. If it had been for any other reason, then Eugene may have felt entertained by this. If it was a result of hitting Noir's reverse scale, 3, then Eugene may have even thought about actively taking advantage of it. However, now he wasn't able to do that. This was because the name that seemed to be acting as a reverse scale for Noir, bringing out all these emotions and expressions that she was showing him, was also having the same effect on Eugene. The response brought about after being provoked by the name Arya seemed to be much stronger than the responses that had arisen from the names Twilight Witch and the Saint of the God of War. But that was why Eugene had to dig even deeper. Everyone looked over in surprise when Noir suddenly attacked Eugene. Naturally, Sienna, the Saints, and all the others had tried to approach Eugene, but Eugene just held his hand out to stop them from approaching and indicated that everything was fine. Why stop them? Noir spat out. Her eyes still looked like they were about to burst into tears at any moment. Staring up into those wavering eyes, Eugene said, "Just because." "Just because?" Noir repeated in a trembling voice. Her hand suddenly shot out to grab Eugene by the collar as she continued. "Aren't you taking me far too lightly? If it weren't for the fact that I love you and I don't want you to die at a place like this, then I would. There is nothing stopping me from killing you right here, right now." It was hard for the current Eugene even to move his body. If Noir was to apply even a little more force, she would be able to break his neck as easily as if she was snapping a dry branch. To prove that what she had said wasn't just a bluff, Noir made a show of mustering up her killing intent. However, Eugene's expression didn't change in the slightest. Still looking straight into Noir's tearful eyes, Eugene resumed speaking to her. "I just thought that the two of us needed to have a conversation right here, right now." Noir remained silent. "You said that I'm taking you lightly? Do you really think that is the case?" "Until now, I have never once taken you lightly," Eugene said sincerely. This was the queen of the night demons, Norgiabella, one of Eugene's oldest foes. Eugene had never once taken her strength or the significance of her identity lightly. So much so that, while he might verbally deride her as the queen of the sluts, whenever he tried to imagine what it would be like to fight her, the first image that came to mind was of his own defeat. "A conversation," Noir muttered in a small voice. That name had triggered something in her head. These memories kept unfolding in her mind. Noir closed her eyes as she tried to catch her breath once more. She let go of his collar. However, her hand didn't pull away. Instead, it drifted a little closer to Eugene. Noir's soft, pale hand caressed Eugene's cheek. Fwish. A pair of bat-like wings unfurled on Noir's back. "I don't want anyone else to see this," Noir whispered in a low voice. Her wings were as large as the ones on Apollo, a Pegasus. After unfurling into the air, her wings slowly lowered to the ground, covering both Eugene and Noir from outside view. I don't want anyone to hear this either, Noir explained to Eugene. Eugene didn't try to stop her actions. This was because he felt the same way. Although he might have revealed to certain key people that he was Hamel's reincarnation, he hadn't said anything about being Agarotha's reincarnation. What was the point of even talking about it in the first place? Unlike Hamel, who was from 300 years ago, Agaroth was someone from the long-distant mythical era. The topics that he would be discussing with Noir from this point onwards would be a story that was difficult for people from this era to understand. Though I feel like this will lead to some pointless misunderstandings, Eugene thought regretfully, but after giving it some more thought he decided that it wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't like today was the first time something like this had happened. Noir had previously stormed into the banquet being held in Shimuan to congratulate Eugene, and they had also had a secret conversation after that as well. Then soon after their late-night secret rendezvous at Giabella Park, their photos had spread all over the continent. So what if this led to some more misunderstandings? Such misunderstandings had already been spread a long time ago. You really are being thorough, Eugene observed with a frown as he stared directly into Noir's face, which hovered right in front of him. Her wings weren't just blocking any sights or sounds from leaving their enclosure. Even the voices of Mare, who was still in his cloak, as well as Sienna and the Saints, with whom Eugene had a mental connection, could no longer be heard. This was because of the powerful magical barrier that Noir had cast through her outspread wings. It's because I wanted to keep this conversation between just the two of us, Noir whispered. Her wings were covering them on all sides, creating pitch-black darkness even deeper than the night outside. However, even in the midst of this darkness, Eugene's face was still clearly visible to Noir. Noir's emotions had settled slightly. "You're the one who said we should have this conversation, my dear." Noir hesitated just as she was about to say his name, Hamel. She experienced a slight difficulty when it came to deciding which name to use, but she still chose to say that name. For Noir, that was the only name that she wanted to use. "Just how long are you planning to stay so close to me?" Eugene complained with a grumble. Noir's face was far too close to his. Her lush hair had fallen down around Eugene, surrounding him like a blackout curtain. The jingling ring had also been lowered when she pounced on him, and it was now resting on Eugene's collarbone. Noir slowly began to speak as both her hands came up to cradle Eugene's cheeks. Slowly, ever so slowly, her hands began to move. Her long fingers delicately caressed Eugene's cheeks, tracing the outline of his face. "Until I am satisfied," Noir selfishly insisted. She wanted to focus on this tactile experience of her fingers physically touching him. She wanted something real, something that was physically present right in front of her, something that she could see and touch, not something that existed only in her memories. Biting down on her bottom lip, Noir continued to trace Eugene's face. She bit down on her lip even harder as she felt despair at remembering something she shouldn't have remembered. The scent of blood began to be carried on Noir's breath. The same thing also applied to Eugene. He had been forced to spit out blood several times during the battle. They both smelled the blood on each other's breath. The scent of blood created a strong connection between them. It seemed to fill the empty spaces in their faded memories, and they both pictured their final moments together. Noir unconsciously began to laugh. She leaned her head slightly forward, getting even closer. The distance between them was already far too close. It was to the point where her eyes were no longer able to take in Eugene's full appearance. Yet even so, it didn't matter to Noir, because she could still feel his face with her fingertips as she looked into his eyes. "I don't think there's much resemblance," Noir quietly muttered. "He looked a bit rougher." "Not in a crude way. I get the impression that he was quite the impressive specimen of a man. The sort of man who looks good in armor. A man who was good at riding horses. The kind of man who looks natural when wielding a huge sword." Eugene stayed silent. Noir continued, "The sort of man who gets along well when surrounded by other men. A man who was good at shouting commands. A man well suited to being on the battlefield. He had bushy hair, intense eyes, stark facial features. While he was quite flirtatious when the time came to be serious, he was extremely serious. He would smile when he was enraged, and he was sensitive about the things that belonged to him." Noir let out another peal of laughter. "No, on second thought you really do resemble him." She wasn't talking about his face. The resemblance was in their attitude, the air they gave off, and other things like that. Is that so? Eugene responded with a wry smile. They weren't exactly the same. This was only natural because, in the end, they were two different people. However, he couldn't deny that there was a resemblance between him and Ogoroth. It's just a resemblance. I am not Ogoroth, Eugene stated firmly. What about me? Moore asked with a smile. Do you think I resemble her? A little, Eugene answered. Moore nodded, indeed. Though I probably don't resemble her too greatly. Because in the first place she was a human while I am a night demon. Probably, Eugene agreed. But then why? Noir trailed off. At some point Noir's hands, which had been caressing his face, suddenly appeared around Eugene's neck. However, her hands weren't strangling his throat. Noir's fingertips gently caressed the hollow of Eugene's neck. Ever so delicately, as if she was stroking a fragile glass bead. Then why did you call me by that name? Noir finished. He had called her Arya. I don't like that name, Noir informed him. Because I am not her. I did it because I wanted to check something, Eugene replied. Check something? Noir repeated as her lips twisted in a frown. That was the reason it had proved very effective. In the beginning, Noir didn't want to reveal her awareness of this to Eugene. Even though it might be revealed someday eventually. And even if it hadn't been revealed, they both would have probably noticed this awareness in each other soon, but Noir hadn't wanted to say anything now, not when her thoughts and emotions weren't in order. However, the moment she heard the name Arya, her body had started moving on its own. I also need to check something, Noir told him, her head lowering a bit further. Within the darkness of her outspread wings, Eugene and Noir's lips touched. Chapter 495. Delusion 3. As Noir lowered her head, she was still thinking. Thinking about the memories that had suddenly resurfaced and the emotions that had come with them. About those names from long ago that she didn't consider to be anything special to her and weren't even worth remembering. As for those that she did consider special. The Twilight Witch. The Saint of the God of War. And the name that he had personally given her, Arya. In all of the hundreds of years she had been alive, Noir had never once been as perplexed as she was now. For Noir, the only thing that should influence her judgment and actions was herself. That was how Noir had lived her life up until this point. Even while experiencing joy, anger, sadness, and all those types of emotions, all of Noir's judgments, concerns, and choices were still ultimately decided through the force of her own will. The same applied when it came to her decision on when to kill Hamel. Noir had spent a long time pondering her complex and heartfelt feelings for Hamel. She had placed all of her desires on a scale, weighing her love and affection for Hamel and the intense killing intent that he would direct toward her against the sense of loss, regret, sorrow, and grief that she would have to experience for the rest of her long life if she were to kill him. She also contemplated the fulfillment and satisfaction that she might feel if she were the one to die. Noir had taken all of that into account and made her choice. No one else had forced that decision for her. But now things no longer felt under her control. The current Noir was like a glass of water with far too many foreign impurities mixed into it. Such a state was extremely unpleasant in and of itself, and she especially hated how she was being affected by memories and emotions that weren't even hers. That was why she hadn't wanted to reveal it to Eugene today. It was because she couldn't be sure if any of the actions she took today were entirely hers, something that Noir Giabella would do. She thought she needed some time. She felt the urge to just run away. If Gavid Lindman hadn't suddenly attacked Eugene, Noir wouldn't have felt the need to descend to the earth and would have instead returned to her fief immediately, or else she would have stayed put inside of her Giabella face. But it's already too late, Noir thought regretfully. The moment she heard the name Arya, all the memories and emotions had resurfaced with far too much intensity. The actions that followed, no matter how much she thought about it, she hadn't been like herself. While chiding herself over this fact, Noir continued thinking. Even at a moment like this, Noir felt some regret. They were locked together in a light kiss with only their lips touching. Both had stopped breathing and neither had closed their eyes. They were staring into each other's unmistakably open gaze. It was different from what she had imagined. If she and Hamel were to ever kiss, Noir had always dreamed of some light explorations of each other's bodies followed by a night of passionate kisses. But no matter how much she had fantasized about it, she had never expected that she would ever actually get to lie in bed with her Hamel. As such, Noor had also imagined a different kiss. One that would take place at the moment when one of them finally delivered the other's end. Whether Noir died at Hamel's hand or Hamel died at the hands of Noir. After they had both become drenched in blood as their breaths became shallow and their vision grew dim, they would put on their rings, exchange a few whispers, then end it with one final kiss. If you have any last wishes, I will listen to them. It's different, Noir muttered as their lips slowly withdrew from the point of contact. Noir giggled as she pressed her forehead against Eugene's. Eugene stared back into Noir's eyes without saying anything. After a few moments, Eugene finally asked, "What's different?" Noir returned his question. "You already know the answer to that, so why are you even asking?" Eugene changed the subject. "I actually suspected that you might have remembered the past already." Noir burst into laughter. Ah! She knew what he was talking about. The rings she had bought for them to wear on their ring fingers. Why had she suddenly thought about rings back then? And instead of ones that were studded with fancy jewels, why had she wanted such ordinary, almost crude rings? Why at that time had she had tears on that dawn-lit street while staring at Hamel's back? "Hamel," Noor said with a slight smile. "When our lips touched just now, I knew for sure. Am not Arya. I do not want to be Arya. Am just more Giabella." Eugene listened in silence. "And you, I know that you also feel the same way. If I had to say why..." Noir's hands once again began to caress Eugene's cheeks. Her fingers traced over his jaw, then moved up to Eugene's lips as she continued speaking. "It's because his lips were much rougher. They gave off the smell of blood, and there was affection." "That sounds about right," Eugene agreed as his lips twisted in a smirk. "As he was Ogoroth. Just as you aren't Arya, I'm not Ogoroth either. However, I do have Arya's memories and emotions," Noir pointed out. "The same goes for me," Eugene nodded along. "Hamel," Noir suddenly whispered. Eugene's face was reflected in her large, round eyes. "Those memories and emotions that don't belong to us, do we allow them to change us?" Noir asked quietly. "No," Eugene denied that option in a low voice. "Since I am me and you are you, we won't change. We can't change." "Ha!" Noir let out a laugh. "What a great answer." Noir also felt the same way. Even if these memories and emotions that didn't belong to her continued to torment her, she would not allow herself to be overcome by this delusion. If she had to give a reason, it was because her self-identity as Noor Giabella, the queen of the night demons, Duke of Helmuth, Lord of Dreamia and Giabella City, was stronger than that of the Twilight Witch, the Saint of the God of War, and even Arya. Noor had confirmed this through their kiss. Not only was it different from her imagination, but he was also different from the man she remembered. "What I want is still the same," Noor informed Eugene as her face slowly pulled away from him. "Do you remember what we talked about in the bar back then? I still want to experience those feelings. Guilt, loss, regret, and all of those other emotions. I want to die at the hands of someone who truly hates me. I still hope that will be you. I don't hate you, but I do want you to love me as much as you hate me." This was the right course of action. As she grabbed the ring on her necklace, Noor said, "The love that I hold for you must end with one of our deaths." Follow current novels on ebnovel.com. Noor felt once more that this was the correct choice. She suppressed the wavering sensation spreading deep within her heart. She would not be overcome by this delusion. However, wasn't it inevitable that there would be at least some wavering in her heart? Although her face had pulled away from his, Noor had yet to raise her body off of Eugene. She was still sitting on top of him with a sad smile lingering on her face. "But I hate this," Noor admitted. "What is it that you hate?" Eugene asked. "When I kill you, I want to feel some hesitation," Noor confessed wistfully. "After hesitating again and again, I want to finally take your life and then feel a sense of loss and regret for the rest of my life. I also hope that you might do the same for me. After hesitating for a long time, I hope that you will finally kill me. Then I want you to remember that someone like me existed for the rest of your life." Eugene held his tongue. Noir sighed. "However, now that might no longer be possible. Will the regret and sense of loss that I will feel after killing you truly belong to me? What about you? Will you regret the loss of Noor Giabella? Or perhaps you will only regret the loss of Arya?" "There's no need for you to worry about something like that," Eugene told her. He wasn't able to move his body with ease, but Eugene still forced himself to look her straight in the eye. "Because there is no way you will be able to kill me," Eugene said firmly. You are the one who is going to die. As such, your worries won't be of any use whatsoever. Ah, Noor laughed as she shook her head. In that case, what about if you survive? Once you kill me, whose emotions will you be feeling? My own, Eugene answered. What a clear response, Noor commented with a smile. It doesn't matter that I had a distant past life as someone named Ogoroth. I am going to kill you and that will be the end of that. As for what I might feel after I kill you, that's something that I'll think about then, Eugene dismissed with a shrug. Noor raised an eyebrow. Aren't you just trying to escape the issue? I am not going to obsess over some kind of fantasy, Eugene said as he glared at Noor. So you should also wake up from your dreams. Noor didn't respond to that and just stared into Eugene's eyes. As he met her gaze, Eugene continued, I am just me and you are just you. As for these memories from our past lives, these emotions, sorry, but for me the present is more important than anything else. That means the current me is more important than who I might have once been. Once he had finished speaking, Eugene took a deep breath. Then, still staring directly into Noir's eyes, Eugene spat out, Do you remember your promise? I remember it, Noir admitted after a short pause. I promise to answer any 3 questions you might have for me. I'll use my final question here, Eugene declared. Noir Giabella, what do you want to do to me? Back in Giabella Park, he had used 2 questions and received their answers. Although Eugene had saved the last question just in case it might prove useful later, Eugene decided that now was the time to use it. Because he thought that he needed to make things clear between them right here and now. You really are cruel, Noir softly muttered. You're also too kind for your own good. What kind of bullshit is that? Eugene just scoffed. You could have taken advantage of my current weakness, Noir pointed out with a giggle, then she shook her head. You're right, Hamel. As the queen of the night demons, Foo-foo to think that I would become lost in a dream like this one. Their positions had been reversed. When they were walking together in the Giabella Park at night, Noir had noticed that Hamel was the one wavering. At that time Hamel had seemed strange. He didn't even try to pretend like nothing was wrong. From the moment they had met in front of Giabella Park, Hamel had appeared agitated. She could still vividly recall what he had looked like back then. Eugene had easily agreed to ride in the Giabella face together, and they had flown through the sky. Then later they had partaken in the lively and beautiful nightlife of her city. At that time, Noir had thought that the reason Hamel was wavering was the gap between the current era and their past. The gap between Noir Giabella of 300 years ago and Noir Giabella of today. She had thought that such hesitation was adorable. She didn't know what he had seen to cause this misunderstanding that was so distressing to him, but his wavering. Noir had thought that the presence of those feelings within Hamel would only add further sweetness to the beautiful arrangements that Noir had made for their final moments together. The reason I feel such sadness and grief, Noir began. She wasn't all that wrong in guessing that Eugene's wavering was because of a gap between the present and the past. However, it was just that the gap that Hamel had sensed was between the present and their very distant past lives. Is that my love for you has been polluted with someone else's love, Noir said regretfully. Noir's hands moved. Instead of continuing to stroke Eugene's face, she gently wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Using that grip, Noir embraced Eugene and pulled him up into a sitting position. Thank you, Hamel. Noir's lips approached Eugene's ear as she whispered to him. With its soft tones and sweetly scented breath, Noir Giabella's voice tickled Eugene's ear as she said, Thanks to you saying those things, even with these past memories of someone who isn't me, I feel like I will still be able to enjoy what we have together. Apart from becoming enemies, isn't there any other way? Now she understood the reason why Hamel had asked such a thing. Allow me to answer your question, Noir said with a smile. At that time Hamel was speaking to Noir Giabella, not the Twilight Witch who was causing him to feel such hesitation. Just like how Noir had confirmed the truth of each other's identity and the truth of her own feelings through their kiss, Hamel had also needed a confirmation. There is no other way. At that time, Noir had given that response without any hesitation. With that response, Hamel had made up his mind. Now, by answering his final question, Noir had fully prepared herself to give a response that truly conveyed her own will. I still want to kill you, said Noir firmly. Their positions may have been swapped, but her answer was still the same. As for the fact that I was the Twilight Witch Arya and the Saint of the God of War, Noir gave a faint smile as she gently strengthened her embrace of Eugene's body. And the fact that you were the god of war, Agaroth, and then Hamel. The more she spoke, the more she felt like her true identity was being reasserted. It felt like every word was adding its weight to her existence, causing her self-identity to grow heavier and more solid. After realizing these facts, we have been distressed by these truths that we didn't want to know, confused by each other's identities as well as our own, and we felt a mix of love and hate as we were shaken by memories and emotions that weren't our own. Nevertheless, as long as we do not give up on our killing intent towards each other and we do all that we can to destroy each other, then at the very last moment if we were to hesitate, Noor sighed as she lifted her head from his shoulder. Shifting position, Noor stared directly into Eugene's eyes as she said, "That moment will be as sweet and as deadly as the finest poison. You can be certain of this, Hamel. If I do kill you, then any feelings of regret, loss and grief that I may have imagined myself feeling beforehand will all pale in comparison to the real things. Perhaps, just perhaps, I might even be left so broken that I can never get back up once more." Eugene held his tongue. "Will that be the case for you as well?" Noor asked him. Eugene still didn't give any form of response. This was because he felt it was too early for him to be sure of an answer to that question. What kind of emotions would he feel at the end that Noor was speaking of? Noor continued to stare at the silent Eugene. He had a stoic expression on his face and a calm look in his eyes. However, as she kept up the stare, she finally began to see some traces of wavering in the depths of his eyes. Finally, Noor burst into laughter once more. "That is just how it is going to be," Noor said, her smile deepening as she lifted herself forward. Unlike when she had first slowly approached him to kiss him, Noor suddenly grabbed Eugene by the neck and then forcefully met his lips in a kiss. As their lips crashed together, her forcefully probing tongue became entangled with Eugene's own. The moment of their kiss was thankfully brief. But those few seconds that Noor had claimed were enough to completely unsettle Eugene. Far from being sweet, romantic or tender, her kiss was fierce and bestial. Before their lips had parted completely, Noir's teeth lightly bit down on Eugene's bottom lip. "I will make sure that's the case," Noir firmly promised. "After all, I happen to be much more attractive than that old woman from our memories." "You crazy," Eugene muttered speechlessly. Blood flowed down from the bite on his slightly swollen lip. Noir stretched out her tongue and licked up that blood, then smashed Eugene's lips in yet another kiss. It was still impossible for Eugene to put up any resistance. Her blood-soaked tongue ran wild inside of his mouth. Eugene bit down on her tongue as it entangled his own a few times, but it was a meaningless protest. The taste of blood soon spread throughout his mouth. Their kiss lasted for another few seconds. As they parted, saliva mixed with blood stretched out in a string between Eugene and Noir's lips. "It will be different from that woman's clumsy kiss," Noir threatened as her wet lips parted in a wide smile. Before Eugene could burst out cursing, Noir climbed off of him. Fwoosh! Her outspread wings folded back up. Light crept back into the darkness that had previously isolated just the two of them. "Hamel," Noir whispered. "I still hate the dawn." She hated being woken up from her sleep in the morning. Eugene had heard her say these words during that dawn in Giabella Park. As Noir finished saying the same thing she did back then, her bloody lips parted in a wide smile. She laughed and said, "But now I feel like I hate the twilight as well." A new desire had formed within her. "I only like the nights where I can keep dreaming forever." As Noir said these words, she truly did seem like the queen of the night demons. Turning around, Noir called back over her shoulder, "Well then, goodbye, Hamel." Unlike the dawn back then, this time, there weren't any tears flowing from Noir's eyes. Chapter 496, Delusion 4. Whoosh! Noir didn't turn into mist and disappear like she had back in Giabella Park. Instead, she spread out her previously folded wings as if to show them off to everyone, then leaped up off the spot and swiftly flew high into the sky. Noir silently tilted her head and glanced down. She saw Eugene standing there, scrubbing away at his lips, which had been covered in their mingled blood and saliva. For some reason, she thought that his appearance was particularly amusing, cute, and lovable, so Noir unconsciously smiled without even realizing that she was doing it. "It's just like you said," Noir murmured. Her lips, which had started off with the light touch of a gentle kiss before roughly crashing into his lips a few more times, still retained the warmth of Eugene or Hamel's touch. The taste of their mingled saliva and blood could still be vividly felt on her tongue. Noor savored the feeling of their love that had been transmitted through her lips and engraved right into her core as she slowly raised her arms to hug herself around the shoulders. What we have to do and what we want to do hasn't changed. Because that is what you and I both desire, Noor whispered. However, because of that, the closing act of their romance would be all the more tragic and heartbreaking. As such, she still needed to bury herself even deeper into his heart. While thinking this, Noor licked her lips. Read Ada's chapters at feebnoel.c sigma m only. The woman who loves you is Noor Giabella. The man I love is you, Hamel Dinas and Eugene Lionheart, Noor stated confidently. Her love was different from the love that had once been held by Arya, the Twilight Witch and the Saint of the God of War. Noor could be sure of that much at least. The love that Noor had felt from the person who now only existed in her memories was a love that was completely unique solely to that woman, to Arya. And even if that hadn't been the case, even if this love was a connection that had been drawn from their past lives, Noor wouldn't be hampered by confusion any longer. After all, there was also a sweet enjoyment to be found in a destined love like theirs. Even if that does mean your hate for me is no longer so pure, Noor sighed softly. The ground was getting further and further away. However, Noir's eyes were still staring right at Eugene. She saw how Eugene had raised his head towards her and seemed to be spitting out curses in her direction. Even when he looked like this, he was still just so lovable. Noor held both hands in front of herself and shaped her fingers into a heart. It just means I'll have to learn how to enjoy such complex feelings as well, Noor encouraged herself. Her body was trembling from the love boiling within her. Noor even felt tempted to swoop down right now and pounce on Hamel. If she decided to act on her desires, then who on earth would be able to stop her? Moreover, the current Hamel was in a state where he couldn't possibly put up any resistance. In other words, this meant that if Noor really decided to go through with her desires, she could do whatever she wanted to him. In that light, should she just head back down immediately to kidnap Hamel? Should she throw him over her shoulder and carry him back to the Giabella face? Should she show him such a wonderful night that it would leave him feeling like he had flown all the way into outer space? The fantasies running through her head, one after another, left Noir's body shivering with excitement. No, Noir told herself firmly. Not today at least. She didn't want to capture or destroy Hamel at such an early date. Noir suppressed the desire rising within her as she turned around to leave. Eugene had scrubbed his lips several times, but the sticky feeling of Noir's mouth on his refused to go away. Her tongue had ravaged the inside of his mouth like a wild beast, leaving behind the mixed taste of their mingled saliva and blood. Too. That rotten bitch, Eugene cursed as he heavily bit down on his bottom lip. The figure of Noir, who had flown up high into the sky, could no longer be seen. Shaking off his anger, Eugene spun around. He tried to walk away, but that soon proved impossible. This was because all of the strength had been completely drained from his legs. Collapsing onto the ground, Eugene let out a curse once more. "Are you all right?" Ivatar asked, approaching the collapsed Eugene. Having been swept away by the gale from Gavid's sword just a few minutes earlier, Ivatar's arms had been left covered in blood. However, he still stretched his hand out towards Eugene without showing any sign of pain. Eugene nodded. "Yeah, and you?" "Apart from losing my beloved axe, I'm just fine," Ivatar replied with a grin as if it wasn't a big deal. If placed in Ivatar's position, most other humans wouldn't have just lost their axes. They would have also lost their lives. That was just how deadly the wind from Gavid's sword had been. However, thanks to Melkith throwing her body forward to act as a shield for the others and Ivatar's own tough physique, he had only suffered minor physical damage. The injuries of the others present weren't much different from Ivatar's. In the case of Melkith, who had been struck directly by the sword wind, her Omega Force had been destroyed, but her physical body had suffered barely any damage. Letting out a sigh of relief at this fact, Eugene accepted Ivatar's support and stood up. Noir, who had once been Agarotha's saint, had recalled the memories of her past life. There was a good chance that Ivatar, who had served as Agarotha's great warrior, might also have recalled his past memories. So, with a suspicious expression and slight hesitation, Eugene asked him, have you suddenly had any memories resurface?" "Memories? What do you mean by that?" Ivatar asked, tilting his head to the side in confusion. When faced with such a question, Eugene wasn't able to come up with an immediate response and was left blinking as he quickly tried to think of what to say. Soon Eugene let out a cough and continued speaking. I just wanted to ask, during the earlier battle, when you looked at me, did you happen to recall anything? I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but I don't seem to have recalled any strange memories. Ivatar shook his head in denial. Was it because their relationship was too shallow? Eugene couldn't really believe that to be the case. It was true that Agaroth had regarded Arya as someone special to him and had truly loved her. However, the great warrior was also Agaroth's faithful comrade and a longtime friend. Could it be because of her lingering attachments? Eugene thought with a wry smile. Arya must have left behind strong emotions and lingering feelings of regret in her final moments. As for the great warrior, he hadn't had the time for that. He had died on the battlefield when the Demon King of Destruction had gone on his rampage. Most of Agaroth's soldiers had died in that battle without even getting the chance to realize what was about to happen to them. And instead of regret, such a death would have been just what the great warrior wanted. After all, he had died while fighting on the battlefield. He had died fighting for his liege. The great warrior Eugene had seen in Agaroth's memories was just such a person. Ivatar suddenly added, however, I did feel a certain emotion. Emotion? Eugene repeated doubtfully. I don't think I'm the only one who felt it, Ivatar explained. During today's battle, everyone who saw you must have felt the same emotion that I did. Eugene Lionheart was the reincarnation of the stupid Hamel. Some of the commanders on the battlefield, including Ivatar, had already been made aware of that fact. However, today's Eugene had left an all-new and incredibly strong impression on everybody who saw him, to the extent that it had erased the particularity of his past life from everyone's minds. To those watching, it had felt like as long as they had him on their side, they would never be defeated. When he led the way forward and swung his sword at their enemies, it seemed like nothing would be able to stop him. It made them want to accompany him. It made them want to follow him wherever he led. It made them want to march into any war that Eugene might start. Eugene had given off a presence of such absolute martial dominance that it made it impossible to imagine him being defeated. Rather than a human, it felt like he was a god. It was as if they had just been spectating as a god decided the final outcome of the war. What we felt was belief, Ivatar explained. He didn't think this was something that he, as the great chieftain of the Zoran tribe who ruled the rainforest, should say. That was because the forest had its own exclusive set of beliefs. However, Ivatar couldn't find any way to express this feeling other than by using the word belief. At the very least, he felt that this feeling was something far beyond simple admiration. Especially at that final moment, the red slash that Eugene had pulled out while he was engulfed in light. It had felt like the sort of mystery that no human could ever hope to copy. Belief, you say, Eugene muttered in a low voice. Eugene's goal for this war was to increase the people's belief in him. Although he had accomplished his goal, he didn't feel too pleased about it. This was because the Spectre hadn't been a purely evil figure. He wasn't truly a demon king. In the end, the Spectre was someone who was left with no other choice but to die in this war. Then Noir had reawakened the memories of her past life. Her feelings for him had become even stronger. But there was yet another reason for Eugene's bad mood. It was all because of that bastard. How long do you plan to stay down there like that? Eugene spat out as his brow furrowed in a scowl. If Eugene could have had his way, he would have wanted to do this while standing on his own without any support, but that wasn't possible right now. Instead, Eugene glared down into a deep pit while leaning against Ivatar. At the bottom of the pit was Gavid Lindman. Although an immense force was pressing down on him from above, trapping him in the space he was in, Gavid's expression was totally calm. He easily lifted his head to glance up at Eugene. What about Noir Giabella? Is your conversation with her over? Gavid asked politely. Eugene snorted. What the hell? So you were just staying here out of consideration for her? Did you really think there might be any other reason for me to do this? Gavid returned the question with a cold smile. Gavid's gaze drifted upwards. While staring at Sienna, who was floating in the sky, Gavid continued speaking. I'll be honest and acknowledge what deserves to be acknowledged. Sienna Meridian's magic had clearly transcended the limits of humanity. To think that such would exist magic that I cannot cut. Then there is Christina Rodriguez. I will also acknowledge her divine power. Having lived through the era of the war, I can guarantee that her miracles have already exceeded those once performed by Anise Slywood. Gavid's gaze moved on from the saint and swept over everyone standing around the pit. Humanity in this era is much stronger than it was 300 years ago. Allow me to clarify. If those present had all been around back then, they also would have been able to defeat the demon kings who fell in that era with just their own strength, without the assistance of Vermouth and his companions. Gavid freely admitted that the demon king of carnage, the demon king of cruelty, and the demon king of fury could have all been defeated by the strength of the humans from this era. If any of them had been born 300 years ago, they might even have been able to claim the title of the hero. In a cold and calmly collected voice, Gavid proceeded to draw a firm line in the sand. However, they still wouldn't have been able to change the outcome of the war. Just like Vermouth and his comrades, they too would have had their hopes shattered upon reaching Babel. While thanking the demon king of incarceration for his mercy, they too would have been forced to beg for peace, thus creating the oath. A fire lit up in everyone's eyes due to this calm yet arrogant declaration. However, no one was able to refute it outright because they all knew that it was the truth. The demon king of incarceration was on a whole other level. And you, Gavid's gaze turned towards Eugene, are you really arrogant enough to believe that things will be different for you? I don't think that's what you truly want to ask me, Eugene said as the corner of his mouth twitched upwards in a smirk. Instead of responding immediately, Gavid narrowed his eyes and glared at Eugene. He tried to figure out what kind of scheme was being put into place behind that cocky smile, but he couldn't figure out what was going on inside Eugene's head. I have to admit, I was trying to be considerate of your situation. After all, wasn't it something that you were desperately trying to hide? Gavid asked challengingly. That was the case until now. Eugene didn't try to deny it. Until now, Eugene had done everything that he could in order to hide the fact that he was Hamel's reincarnation. He had had no choice but to do so. Hamel's name had a lot of negative associations with it. Just look at what Gavid had done today. As soon as he found that Eugene was the reincarnation of Hamel, hadn't he immediately rushed out to kill Eugene? If the fact of Eugene's reincarnation had been made public any sooner, his enemies would have come to kill Eugene before he was ready to deal with them. That idiot Iris would have surely come to try and kill me, Eugene thought to himself. There had been much more to lose than there was to gain by revealing his reincarnation. That was why he had hidden it. However, what about now? What if his enemies came looking for him to try and kill him? At this point, there weren't many people left who Eugene would even consider to be his enemies. And by now, all of Eugene's true enemies had already found out about his reincarnation. The demon king of incarceration, Noor Giabella, and Gavid Lindman. Aside from those three, did Eugene really have any other enemies in the entire Devildom? No, there weren't any. He could be sure of that. Those three were all that he had to worry about. The remaining enemies were all small fries that he didn't even have to take the time to think about. Gavid huffed as he sensed the arrogant implications behind Eugene's words. However, he didn't truly feel discomfort by Eugene's disregard. Among the younger generation of demon folk, were there any who could really be considered Eugene's enemy? There were none. Jagan, who had at least had a small chance of growing up to be such an enemy, had died a few years ago. Apart from Jagan, it would take at least another century for any of the other younger demon folk to become strong enough to pose a threat to Eugene. In that case, what about the demon folk of the older generations, those who had managed to survive the era of war? This included all of the higher-ranking demon folk within the top 50 ranks of Helmuth. The very highest-ranking demon folk among them even possessed a ranking in the single-digit range. Could they, who had been granted a share of the demon king's dark power, claim to be Eugene's enemies? They're still lacking, Gavid judged. Even among the demon folk who were members of the Black Fog and thus excluded from the ranks, none could fight one-on-one with Eugene either. No, even if all the demon folk of the Black Fog were to attack Eugene at once, they would all just be defeated. So because of that, there's no longer any need to keep hiding it? Gavid asked in confirmation. That's right, Eugene agreed. A red glow ignited within Gavid's eyes. Pitch-black dark power also began to flow from the demon's sword, Glory, that he held in his hand. Crackle, cracker, crackle. Sienna furrowed her brow in concern at the slowly increasing levels of dark power. She was wary of Gavid's demon eye of divine glory and his demon sword Glory. As expected, even with her absolute decree, was it still impossible to simply keep him suppressed? Sienna and Christina briefly exchanged glances. However, Eugene gave the order before they could do anything. That's enough. Stop wasting your effort on someone that we can't deal with for now. Everyone back off. Sienna's expression twisted in displeasure at these words. After pouting her lips and glancing reluctantly at Eugene, she let out a sigh as she withdrew her spells. At the same time, the saints also retracted their divine power, and everyone surrounding the pit took a few steps back. Those present could be counted as among the continent's most elite warriors, but they all followed Eugene's orders instinctively. Instead of hesitating, they all took action immediately before they could express any doubts they might have been feeling. All of this inevitably left Gavid with a sense of mounting tension. 300 years ago, although Hamel was certainly strong in terms of martial strength, he still hadn't built up much of a reputation for himself. Among the party members, Vermouth was the one who mainly focused on dealing with that aspect of things. But even Molen had managed to garner enough popularity to later establish a kingdom on his own. Hamel hadn't done any of that. His comrades who had spent a long time around him might consider him differently, but the majority of people who had merely met Hamel in passing remembered him as a rough, irrational and violent man. However, what about now? The current Hamel could easily mobilize enough firepower to destroy an entire nation with just a single word. "You've changed," Gavid accused. "I don't think that you really know me well enough to make such an observation," Eugene sniffed. "I'm sure that I know you just as well as anyone does," Gavid muttered with a snort. There were several reasons why Eugene hadn't revealed his reincarnation. The main reason he had continued to hide his reincarnation, even after gaining enough power that he didn't need to worry about his enemies, was that Eugene was embarrassed. While that was certainly one reason for it, that wasn't the full story. It was for the sake of belief. Eugene wanted to create a distinct separation between Hamel Dynaz, the hero from 300 years ago, and the hero Eugene Lionheart. This was part of Eugene's attempt to make the people of the current era feel a pure sense of worship towards the hero, thus gathering their belief towards himself. If the fact that he was Hamel's reincarnation was revealed, Eugene was worried that the belief flowing towards the hero might end up getting polluted by something else. However, now that was no longer a concern. Through this war, Eugene had developed an even greater confidence in himself. He had shattered the previous limits of his existence as a human being and had advanced even further forward. When he was fused with the light, Eugene had felt himself absorbing the worship and belief of those present on the battlefield. So now, the identity of Hamel Dynaz could no longer overshadow that of Eugene Lionheart. Any worship of Hamel would just serve to increase Eugene Lionheart's strength even further. It was a matter of public perception. Eugene Lionheart had made a name for himself as the hero who had already defeated 2 demon kings in the present era. In doing so, his reputation had grown even larger than that of Hamel Dynaz, who had defeated 3 demon kings as a member of Vermouth's party 300 years ago. That was why Eugene was able to declare without any hesitation, "I am Hamel's reincarnation." Nor did he make any efforts to limit the number of people hearing him say this like he had the last time he revealed this news. Eugene's words were spoken with such volume and clarity that all of the thousands of people currently gathered on this battlefield could clearly hear him. In a calm and clear voice, without using any complex formats, Eugene simply made his declaration. Gavid unconsciously let out a laugh. Heh. Fwoosh. His dark power surged upwards. Gavid leaped out of the deep pit and slowly glided down towards Eugene. Ivatar, who was supporting Eugene, flinched and tried to respond by retreating, but Eugene's hand suddenly grabbed hold of Ivatar. His hand gave Ivatar a very mysterious feeling. Eugene was currently in such a weak state that it would be difficult for him to even pull up a single blade of grass. Although Ivatar had been described as supporting Eugene, it was more like Ivatar was the only thing holding up Eugene's limp body. Even though that was the case, when Eugene's hand suddenly grabbed Ivatar's wrist, it felt like some kind of force had grabbed hold of Ivatar's entire body. Ivatar ended up following Eugene's order as if it was only natural for him to do so. Although he wanted to distance himself from that intense dark power, even if it was just the slightest bit, since Eugene was still holding on to him as if to say, "It will be fine," Ivatar truly felt like nothing would happen to them. As such, Ivatar didn't move an inch from his spot. "Hamel of extermination," Gavid said with a cold smile as he landed in front of Eugene. "It has been quite a long time." Although the greeting had come late, every word that Gavid spat out was filled with murderous intent. "Indeed, it has been a while, you bastard," Eugene cursed, his voice filled with disgust rather than an intent to kill. Why are you suddenly pretending to be a gentleman when you just tried to launch a surprise attack on me when you knew I was weak? Fucking bastard.